thank you very much, one and all. Minister Lord Brennan, the government announced a year or so ago now its Built Environment Reform Programme. Can you sort of succinctly summarise the purpose of that strategy, first of all?
Yes. I think, as politicians, MHKs, ministers, you get a lot of feedback, understandably, about, I guess, like the planning system, but not just that, but also how the island looks, how it feels. And so the thinking really, really early on in this administration was to think we needed to wrap all of this stuff up all together in a dedicated and sort of funded programme in order to look at all the different areas that perhaps needed to be reviewed and addressed. So that's come... That came forward really within a few months at the start of this administration, led from the centre by Cabinet Office, but also involving officers in the Department for Enterprise and also DEFA that have the planning and building control. That's the part of government that deals with planning applications, as you'll know. And really there was an emphasis on trying to make sure that there could be an improvement in some of the processes, perhaps in customer service, but also in terms of introducing new initiatives to, I guess, front load some of the work in terms of planning applications to address issues or draw them out, hopefully resolve them, so that later on down the line, there's less of a chance, perhaps, of an application not being approved in that process. But one of the other things that came forward out of that was the idea of having an island infrastructure scheme. Again, for many, many years, some of these dormant sites have just been left, nothing happening, no work getting underway. And why is that? It's because obviously for the private sector, it costs a lot of money for the extra money for them to tackle those brownfield sites versus developing on green fields. So that's partly why some of the announcements could be made earlier today. So it's quite good that in a focused programme encompassing lots of different actions across government, and it's now been delivered and overseen by DEFA, that we're starting to see some of those things come to fruition. Other things will take more time, but there is a policy stuff around town centre first and other improvements that are going on. So it's live, it's progressing. I think part of the good thing about it has been that it's been done in a cross-department way. It had a budget allocated initially, and it's got a clear programme management. So the different officers in government in trying to address the issues know what they're doing, and we're making progress on it.
Well, there's been largely good feedback since this morning's announcement. I want to bring Rob in at this point, because have you got any examples that you can share with us of successful infrastructure revitalisation projects from elsewhere, other regions that the Isle of Man can actually learn from and draw inspiration from, potentially?
Yes, I do, and I am going to read a couple of them, because I thought I'd also introduce some developments that are happening over in America as well, which is worth looking at sort of a little further ahead. But if you look at Manchester, Manchester City Football Club, and what they did with the whole area of Eastlands, which was a hugely derelict and not a particularly pleasant part of Manchester, and now is hugely vibrant. The Northern Quarter in Manchester is another good example where it's seen a 20-year regeneration. You have Bristol, and there's two sides to what Bristol are doing. They've got their One City plan, which is an initiative which is more driven around social value of making Bristol City a better place to live by 2050. You then have the business district of Bristol, which is a 25-year plan, and is probably the biggest growth development in the UK at the moment. And that's, again, mixed use, so it's housing, it's enterprise, it's public realm, it's kind of reintegrating with aspects of the community that live in the city centre. Of course, London's an obvious one. You've looked at Nine Elms, which is, a new district within London, and that involved reconfiguring Covent Garden Flower Market, which is one of the most prestigious flower markets in the UK. But also circa 5,000 new units have been built there, housing units. Obviously, it opened up the foreshore of the River Thames a lot more. The American Embassy moved there, much to Donald Trump's disgust, so I don't think he ever visited it. And there's, Earl's Court, which is a repurposing of the exhibition hall in West London, which will be creating 1,800 homes. All of these are brownfield development sites. And then if I look further afield, because some of these are quite interesting, and some of my colleagues shared them with me. So there's the last brownfield site in Pittsburgh, which is a 170-acre site, occupies a mile and a half of the river, privately purchased, 20-decade plan to reclaim the waterfront. They want to re-enter the market, connect regional economic hubs, share the shoreline with the community, and fundamentally instigate growth, renewal, and progress the city. So I think there are many, many examples out there.
I was going to say, Rob, anyone would have thought you knew that question was coming, the way you were prepared for that. Thank you very much. Mott, Lewin, how can we as an island balance our need for modernisation and infrastructure development whilst we preserve our unique cultural and historical heritage?
Thank you, James. What a great question, and a real thorny one. I think it came up in the previous presentation from Sue, where it talks about balance. That needs to look at a wide range of factors to have a vision and then to kind of balance that through. From a Department for Enterprise perspective, we have a visit agency talking next door at the moment. Absolutely recognise the real value in terms of heritage as an economy for us, our visitor economy. We have tens of thousands of people that visit every year, and they hugely enjoy what we have to offer. We also work closely with Manx National Heritage, and we know the pressure they're under in terms of maintaining our current heritage assets. So there's a real challenge there. It's real value. From a locate perspective, we've spent a lot of time through the conference talking about attracting people here, about retaining people, and again, recognising our heritage assets, our culture. That's a hugely important part of that proposition. On the other side, we're also talking about investing for the future. We want to see growth. We want to minimise the impact on the likes of our greenfield sites and protect our beauty. Therefore, and there's been a lot of emphasis, particularly through this administration, on focusing on brownfield, around repurposing. I applaud the work of MDC and about whether they'll be able to see an asset and actually bring that back to life rather than try and build new on that space. But there are equally sites that fundamentally just simply aren't viable, and I don't think it serves anyone any value for something to sit there that fundamentally isn't viable in the long term. It has to be sustainable in a much longer term. So finding that balance is key. The Minister talked about the Built Environment Reform Programme, and that talks about making sure our policies are up to date. So making sure that not just we're thinking about pure planning policies, ecology, heritage, conservation, but we're also thinking of all the other policies, the economy and other aspects that all play into that. But I think the short answer is it's a difficult balance, and it's one that we have to look at case by case. We have to do it transparently, we have to do it with real integrity, and we have to do it with pace.
If time allows, we might explore that a bit more. Thank you, Mark. Emily Curphey, how important is, it's obvious really, the answer's in the question, how important is transport infrastructure in creating these successful places? We know how important it is. Actually, the question probably should be, how can we fulfill meet the needs?
Yeah, so obviously it is very, very important. I think it's beyond transport, it's that connectivity. And I think we've seen that in numerous presentations today. The Mott McDonald presentations this morning were sort of showing how places need to connect with that wider environment. And I know that Dane's just talked to us there about the connectivity and the 20-minute neighbourhood concept. I think connectivity is really, really important. It's not just the car, it's not just driving places and parking places, it's the connectivity within sites as well. So active travel and public transport are really important as well. And we have to get that marrying up of places and those nodes and modes of transport so that we can have proper places and proper spaces that are connected to one another. How we achieve that, I think, is that we recognise that at the very start of the process of how people are going to get there, how they're going to move around there, and that we work as a team together. And I think Minister Lord Brennan has already explained that we are working together across government to try and get as much of that into that early thinking, so that we are looking at the spaces and how people connect right at the very start and building that in. And the sooner that we can get sort of public transport certainly integrated within developments, then the likelihood of people using those modes as that development moves forward into occupation is much higher.
Thank you. And Andrew, can I discuss a bit, because obviously you're here as chairman of the Regeneration and Community Committee with the council, but you're an architect as well by profession. It should be, hopefully, it should work absolutely just like that. Can you touch upon the role of community engagement and collaboration between local authorities, businesses, and residents, actually, in shaping the future of neighbourhoods?
Well, you say local authorities, and it's
Fostering
local
a sense of
authorities
belonging, yeah.
are generally consulted rather than the people doing the consultation. But there are examples. For example, in Douglas, I'd say there's two fronts. One is the public housing, the other is the town centre management, or city centre management as it is now. I know that we're very good at collecting data within the council. We can tell you anything from how many books we lent last month to how many people walked down Strand Street and how many tons of glass we collected. And that information is very readily available. And I think when you speak to our officers, a lot of what we do in terms of consultation is more either collecting data or building relationships. So, for example, we have the city centre manager who is in almost daily communication with many of the businesses in the town. We have housing officers. We have about one housing officer for every 700 houses. These people are in constant contact, speaking to our tenants, understanding their needs, and we know what the housing need is. We don't need to do that same sort of formal consultation. It's a constant building up of a relationship and accumulation of data. Now, there are other local authorities who've taken a very different approach. I know both Port Erin and Castletown. I think Castletown led the way and Port Erin have followed in that vein. They've been looking at their public spaces and have used a local architect called Betty Larinakova. She's a Slovak architect with much experience in Sweden. She primarily works with the space between buildings rather than being an architect that works with buildings. And it's been very interesting, the work that she's done to sort of try and get information with public consultation, with online responses, but also how to reach out to people who otherwise wouldn't have been contacted by a consultation. So there's been free pizzas at the railway station when the schools are coming out, for example, to get the teenager opinion, or the consultations taking place in the library in Castletown to try and get the young mothers. And I think that's really, really important, that when you are consulting, that you actually consult on quite a wide breadth of the population to make sure that people have their voices heard. In Douglas, I think that it's not been the last major consultation I think we had was the Living Streets consultation in Western Douglas in the Ballacameen area. That isn't how I would have done it, but that's how they tended to put the big scheme out there, and then it caused shock and horror. I did my own little consultation in Derby Square area where it was more about speaking to people who spoke to people. You get them on board, and I did a little project with one of the highway officers in the Department of Infrastructure, and we came up with something where the people really felt a sense of ownership about the thing that we came up with, and we took it forward with the DOI, and we're still waiting. So if the DOI would like to progress it, there'd be many people in Derby Square who'd be very grateful. Thank you.
I'll interject at that point. Thank you very much. Dane, just before we open up to the floor, what role do you think brownfield regeneration takes in ensuring that redevelopments are, developments and redevelopments are sustainable?
Yeah, it's really important. You know, there's the obvious one that we don't want to be building on our greenfield areas. You know, we want to protect those as much as we can. So the brownfield comes to the fore. But it links in with, you know, the fact that a lot of the brownfield sites, I think when people think brownfield sites, they just think an area of like kind of crushed brick, but it also obviously encompasses existing buildings. And as I said in my presentation, the reuse and the actual improvement of those existing buildings is really key. You know, because we've got a large asset that's still going to be around in many years to come. I think in addition to that, Emily's point around kind of transportation and connectivity, I think in the past, a lot of people will look at active travel and say, oh, well, it's using bikes, it's walking, it's things like this. But actually, it's providing the infrastructure to make that a viable option, So you might stick a cycle hoop outside a development, but actually, if you've not got then somewhere where you can go and change, somewhere you can go and have a shower, somewhere where you can lock your helmet away, things like that, if you provide that infrastructure, then the active travel element becomes a real viable option. The linking with public transport. We spoke to bus vanning when we were looking at Westmoreland Village in terms of looking to redivert buses. So actually, there's an increased population that's going to be down there. How can we service that area? In terms of what Mott was talking about, the historic buildings, when we looked at the nurses' home, it wasn't a registered building, but it was an iconic building within the city. Really important. It's actually, I think, until you do the kind of section in terms of topography around that area, it's surprising how prominent that building is. So to come in and think about knocking it down, just in our view, wasn't the way forward. But there's complexities around brownfield regeneration. There's cost. It's often not cheaper to refurb an existing building. It's cheaper to actually knock it down and build again. But you lose that heritage. You use that, that building has been part of that community for a long, long time. But also behind all of the, we can build the most sustainable buildings that run off air source heat pumps and PVs and be highly insulated. But there's got to be a need there for those buildings. There's no point in us building a building on a brownfield site that's the most energy efficient thing that there is, if the thing that it's being built for only lasts for 18 months and then suddenly you've got an empty building there that's doing nothing. The UK, there's quite a few from the kind of Millennium projects. I know one in Sheffield that they built, I think it was the Pop Music Centre, really sustainable building, had these big kind of funnels on the top for natural ventilation. I think the installation lasted about 2 years, and now it's a Tesco Metro. So there's, we talk about sustainability, and I think the main thing that we focus on is energy efficiency, the environment, but actually it's the social, it's the business case behind all of these to make sure that actually what we're doing, if there's a need for it, and it's all encompasses that whole sustainable element. And brownfields play a real key part in that.
Other supermarkets are available.
Yes.
Incidentally, I bet you're not the only one in this room who was born in the Jane Crockle, certainly. Rob Hilton, what does the construction industry need to do then to be an enabler for brownfield redevelopment? Brownfield development, I should say.
I think Dane touched on it in his previous presentation and talked about some of the complexities around brownfield sites, because ultimately there is potentially a lot of risk in developing a brownfield site, and those risks need to be really understood, and we touched on that in our presentation earlier today, around really understanding what the long-term view of the building is. But also there needs to be an element of certainty in terms of what is being walked into. There needs to be an economic case that underpins it, and that can be a challenge because new builds typically are it's easy to knock something down, clear the ground out, and go again. But actually, what we're seeing in London is. Well, one, there's not too much space anymore. There's a lot of repurposing going on. In terms of the construction industry, it's actually getting the people that are going to build the building in much earlier, so that they are part of the solution. I think the days have gone where client writes a brief, consultant takes the brief forward, works with the architect, works with the engineers, develops something, then you go and get your contractor, and then they build it, and then you have a load of commercial people running all over the contract because risks have not been fully understood. So I think now what's happening, certainly on mega infrastructure projects, we're bringing the contractors in much earlier now, so they're looking at the constructability, they're looking at the risk profile and saying, we can't take that on our books, we can't, so we're going to have to do something differently. So actually it's having it's having the guys at the end working with us at the start and everyone understanding what the risk profile is, and therefore there's a lot more certainty when you develop something or redevelop something or reinvigorate or regenerate something that was a brownfield site.
Somebody who was in here this afternoon obviously wasn't very keen on the presentation. because they've said, following today's news of a new housing association who have presented an aggressive development plan for new housing, strategically, how will the two organisations exist with maximum benefit and not conflict? I'm just looking down the line. Who would like to take that one? I appreciate we've moved off housing associations now, but I think we should respond to that. Minister.
I think in putting forward the proposals for a new model of housing for a housing association, it's important to realise as well that this is a proposal that will go to Tynwald as well for debate and approval for next steps. If it's been described as an aggressive approach for housing, I think that there are many people who would think actually we need quite an urgent and serious response to the housing issues we face, and I think that rather than so I think that's probably the sort of description rather than aggressive. Certainly, what we can't have is a passive stance to these issues. And we do, though, probably aggressively need to professionalise some of the activity around how housing is handled across the piece on the Isle of Man. And I think that from some of the, quite a few of the kind of external panellists and speakers we've had today have all sort of helped, reaffirm or inform a perspective which says, look, if government or the sort of existing authorities or those with responsibility, if you like, on the island need to tackle a particular issue that requires specialised knowledge and input, then actually go and get that. If that's what it takes to deliver for the public, then that is what should happen. I think that there are ways, certainly, that the Manx Development Corporation and potentially a housing association model could work together, but we actually probably don't need to figure that out now. The Manx Development Corporation has got a very specific remit, that there is potentially a chance for that to change. But at the moment, I think that certainly politically and at officer level, what we do want to see is that the MDC has enough chance to focus on the key projects, and there is a number of them that they're working on in order to bring those to fruition. The broader part about housing associations and how that might help people for housing, just completely at all different stages in life and across the board, is a slightly different question. But do we want to make sure these things all work together and help towards the overall endeavour? And the answer to that would be yes. It does require a concerted effort, and I do think we've reached a point where we need to be quite assertive about that.
Mark Lewin.
And if I could just add, I think certainly one of the messages we hear from the Department for Enterprise is we need a variety. So the announcements this morning in relation to the Island Infrastructure Scheme that talked about town and city centre living, we need some of that. The work that the MDC is doing around creating the communities, around key worker accommodation, around townhouses and some affordable houses as well, we need some of that. Housing association around social housing, again, we get the message, we need some growth in that space as well. And more generally, and it was in the presentation again this morning, there is a significant amount of broader planning around the expansions of some of our towns, and we probably need some of that as well. So I think the Island Plan set out that clear vision. It talked about 1,000 new homes occupied, and that isn't just one element. It is a broad spectrum of many different aspects we need, because our society is broad and continues to grow.
And Dane.
Yeah, I think Minister Hooper outlined it in the housing presentation. I think personally, we need to get on and we need to build some stuff. Putting it bluntly, buildings, it takes time. It takes time to plan. It takes time to understand the risks. It takes time to go through planning. And it takes a long time to build things. And with the weather that we have, it takes maybe slightly longer.
Who owns these now vacant sites? The government? Is it MDC? Who owns them officially?
No, so they're currently owned by various government departments. We've been asked to look at a number of those. And we're putting proposals forward for those, and arguably, a lot of the sites it's in a way it's quite easy to outline what you think should go on them, because if you've got a large empty site within the middle of a residential area, then residential probably sounds like a good scheme. So I really just think we need to get on, and if it's an MDC development, then gets passed on to a housing association, but let's get some things built. and then someone can make that decision further down the line.
What is the budget for the nurses' home development?
Well, with us being a private arm's length developer, in terms of the commercial sensitivities around that, so, we haven't come out in terms of where we're at. We feed
You
into
have an estimated development cost, presumably.
Well, we're on site with a contractor. We have a contract in place. We have a business case that backs that up that we feed into the Brownfield Regeneration Steering Group, of which the Treasury Minister, obviously as our shareholder, sits on, along with the Cabinet Minister and along with the DFE Minister. So, we provide a business case. I think it's worth noting, we aren't building capital schemes here like government departments. We're proposing developments. That development will show a return, whether that's on a rental basis or a sale basis. We are a private business that needs to make a return to its shareholder.
Just while we're chatting, questioning why was the announcement of the Westmoreland Village Plan made before the government, before the MDC owned all the land at the site? Was that the case?
Well, we've gone in for planning on the development. There is a number of private residential dwellings and businesses.
Has that negatively impacted your leverage in negotiations?
No. So before we went to planning, we'd obviously spoke to all of the landowners, and we are going through processes in terms of purchasing all those. It's well advanced. But I think there's maybe some people might not understand. You could put in a planning application on any building. You don't have to own the building. I could put in a planning application on Buckingham Palace if I wanted to. In terms of a two-room extension on the side, but I'm sure it probably wouldn't go through. But we can go down that process, and we did. But prior to going into planning, and we undertook 2 days of public consultation, invited everybody to come down. I think we had 111 through the door. We'd spoken to all the private landlords. We'd outlined what we were looking to do, and we'd come to an agreement, and we're working through at that point the legal processes to obtain those properties.
Emily, I know we talked about infrastructure before and transport. I think connectivity was the phrase you used. As a department, are we preparing to ensure that infrastructure, that public transport services can meet a population potentially of 100,000? Because it's obviously longer term.
Yeah, so we, as part of the Island Plan, there's a commitment in there that the department will prepare a transport strategy. So we are in the early stages of that and looking at that. It also we'll feed in and engage with the work that Cabinet Office are doing with the preparation of the strategic plan. So that will start to look at that spatial distribution of the population, and therefore, what sort of transport connectivity infrastructure will be required when that new population comes to fruition. So we're engaged across government in terms of looking at future plans and how best to meet those needs. Obviously, some things like new highway development take time for us to do. A new bus route, I think we can potentially look at that in a much quicker time frame. So yeah, we've got different things at our fingertips that can meet the requirements of the population as and when.
Question for each panellist here. Well, we've got time. If you could transform one brownfield site outside of those in the Douglas area, which one would it be and why? Dane.
You come to me first. I personally think the Castletown Golf Links is probably is one that I would probably zone in on. I know obviously there's been applications for that, but I was walking out there the other day. It's a really lovely spot, and I used to play golf down there and remember it when it was still in operation. So I think to get that one moving, I think would be a real benefit.
Andrew?
I'd go for any of those little sites in Ramsey that go between Parliament Street and the Quay. Ramsey has wonderful little ginnels that just, they're barely the width of a human being, and it's something that's really quite unique to that town. I think, just to get one of those right could really set the precedent for quite a few of the others. And it's the one next to the Trafalgar, where you've got one of the best pubs on the island, going through to what's quite a lovely square, and then you make your way around to the wonderful little curry house that they've just opened, and then round to the gelatorium. You know, it's all about exploring. That's what great cities are about. They're about exploring, and I think Ramsey's got great potential.
You've been
there.
frequenting it up north quite a bit, by the sounds of it, lately.
I got a pass on the railways, and I just go there all the time now. Yeah.
Emily?
It's a really difficult question. There's so many things you could choose. I think for me personally, from a very personal perspective, not a departmental perspective, I think the former swimming pool in Port Erin, I think you can still see some of that sort of old infrastructure as what it was used for, and imagine a bygone era where people were there and enjoying that sort of coastal environment. I think there's something special about there that, you know, you could do something there if money was no object. I think that would be something special.
That will be your choice. Mark, any particular personal springs to mind?
Again, it's a hard question, particularly for an area as officers. We'll end up commenting on planning applications in the future and helping to try and shape the kind of priority that we're working through. So I can only say from a personal perspective, I have memories as a child of the likes of Port Sodrick as a venue to go to with facilities and as Emily said, with the the fabulous seaside and all that activity around it. But we have to take a step through it. We are doing a significant amount at the moment, and there's a limit on what we can do. But for me, Port Sodrick, at some point, I'd love to see that redeveloped.
Rob?
I think I'm semi-qualified to answer this because I have got family on the island and I do come every year. So it's going to be kind of probably a relatively boring response. But again, it's something we touched on earlier, certainly specifically with Q, which was the case study I was talking about. It's actually making sure that the critical assets that you need to maintain and stimulate the economy on the island. I think those need, as much as, those are brownfield sites by nature, but they are critical to the island. Everyone likes new shiny stuff, but the kind of the critical assets you need to continue to thrive as an economy and grow as an economy, I think are as important.
And finally, Kate Lord Brennan.
So it's probably less of a difficult question for me to answer as an MHK. And of course, many of these sites where there might be potential opportunity, that they're not in government hands, they might be in private hands, or they might be in hands of a charity. So my first two examples would be those in those hands respectively. So the first one for me in Peel would be there's an old engineering site going up towards the Ramsey Road. That one there. Also, the Corrin Home too. That was right in the heart of Peel. But actually, I think Mark started to touch on something before. And, we think about how the island, used to look, assets that we used to have. And I think sometimes they can inform us as to what we might want in the future. Now, we've got all these, and this is, maybe this is just flight of fancy, right? But why not? We used to have brilliant sea pools, didn't we? In many places on the island. And I, on a trip to Guernsey last year, could see what, through a combination of kind of community fundraising and I guess whatever the local authority or government body at the time, they had restored the changing rooms and the facilities and the cafe around this particular sea pool. And there's in other places, this is happening with Lidos and things like that too. So I think, there's definitely things from tourism in the past that you think, wow, wouldn't it just be fantastic to get these up and running again? But quite often they do take community efforts, but they can fundraise in interesting ways. People might contribute for the sake of being able to kind of maybe have their name or their family name, sort of integrated into the design of the building. So if you're after sort of a kind of yesteryear flight of fancy potential, I would go for the restoration of kind of old sort of Lidos and outside pools.
How long are you planning to stay with the MDC for, Dane?
A long time.
There's an awful lot of work there, isn't there? There's an awful lot on the wish list.
I think the thing around the outdoor pools, outdoor sea swimming now is a really popular thing, isn't it? I think there's a mural at the bottom of Port Jack that the Blue Tits did there the other day, and like you say, you've got the one in Port Erin. I think there was at the back by Douglas Lighthouse used to be, and I think things like that. It's arguably things come back around, don't they? And the popularity of that and the actual health and well-being benefits of it are really important. But unfortunately, these kind of things will come back to the cost of redoing these kind of things, unfortunately. And it's how can we potentially unlock these opportunities where, you know, it might be a unique thing that the Isle of Man provides. And you know, as you outlined in Guernsey, I'd seen that article. I think it's, you know, it's a great way of you know, of reinvigorating the old assets that we've had in the past, and, you know, hopefully those kind of things can be unlocked over time.
Another question here. Does the panel feel the island's held back sometimes by a desire to live in the past, a reluctance by the public to have faith in new ways of thinking like Westmoreland Village scheme, which will no doubt face significant resistance? Is that, do you encounter that attitude, that approach, Andrew?
I saw something quite delightful a few weeks ago. I don't know why Facebook does it. It popped up a thing about old Malta. And it showed the big roundabout at the gates of Valletta. And I went there many years ago, and it was lots of cheap stalls, and then there was this really quite pretentious gate as you entered into Valletta, and then it was a Burger King and souvenir stalls. And this is the capital of a nation, and this was the home of the Knights of St. John. And the Maltese government actually removed a lot of these stalls and had a proper bus station, and they had a new gate put in and the new Parliament building, all done by Renzo Piano. And the comments that you saw, you could have just removed the word Valletta, inserted the word Douglas, and you realise that the whole world's just one big village, and the comments are going to be the same everywhere.
Anybody else got a view on that? I mean, do you meet resistance? Do you meet negativity? Is that a trait in a small knit community, or is it quite the opposite?
I've done a number of developments, both UK and here, and, you know, unfortunately, you're never going to please everybody. There will be people who either don't want the development, want something different. But I think, you know, there's if we feel that it's the right way forward, and, you know, the majority are there going, well, actually, it could be a great thing and be a real catalyst to regeneration, then, you know, I personally feel we've got to move forward with them. You know, I was part of the team that delivered the Storyhouse Theatre in Chester, and that was a cultural project that actually now has allowed that whole quarter of Chester to be redeveloped and reimagined, and really breathe, you know, it was the kind of catalyst for that. You know, in addition to that, I worked on the Shakespeare North project in Prescott, and now there's hotels popping up, there's bars, there's restaurants, and the whole town has been revitalised. You know, the transport links from the railway station up to where the building was have all been improved. So there's that. You've sometimes got to take a leap of faith in some of these things, and there's plenty of examples. Rob's provided a lot of them. I've been involved in a number, and it's probably giving people that confidence that actually, if we do this, that change will actually happen. You know, the classic line, a bit cheesy, but if you build it,
they will come.
And it's if you get it right and you get the right buildings, it can really happen and can have some real dramatic impact.
I mean, you've talked of vibrant examples, Rob. Is that what you encounter more than most, or actually is there that degree of negativity wherever you go? And as Dane said, you won't please all of the people all of the time.
I mean, there is inevitable resistance to change. And it doesn't matter how progressive plans are, there is always going to be a level of resistance. But Andrew touched on it, Sue touched on it earlier, around getting the right people involved early enough, going through the right level of consultation, recognising that not everybody can have everything, because you will have polar perspectives, and so that's inevitable. So therefore, it's how do you present something and consult in a structured way that takes people on the journey. People understand where the compromise is, and it's constructive compromise, and you've got the right expertise along the journey with you, and then you've got the best chance of success. You can do some amazing things with grade listed buildings, things that 20, 30 years ago, probably wouldn't have even imagined, where you've got, you know, modern glass construction next to, you know, grade 1 listed structures. So anything's possible. Dane touched on it earlier. It takes time. Andrew touched on it. You've got to go through the right levels of consultation. And Sue touched on it around if you've got the right town planning mentality, then anything's possible. but not everybody will get everything.
Mark?
And I think just adding to that, one of the strengths from the Department for Enterprise we talk about when we're talking to businesses and individuals about the Isle of Man is the ability to have positive engagement. So we shouldn't shy away from or disregard feedback, criticism. It's really important. I think it's incumbent upon us and whoever's taking those forward, as Rob said, explain it properly. It's incumbent upon us to then, consider those and, as Dane said, actually deliver it. But that ability as a small island to get engaged, to have the discussion, to have the debate, to recognise all sides in terms of spectrum of people's views, I think really is important. And then have the faith. It's really important to have a plan, have a vision, and it goes back to all the themes through the conference around knowing where we're going.
Emily Curphey, a message in, there was a report carried out a few years ago about the DOI. Are there any actions being taken to implement the findings and conclusions of that report? Off the top of my head, I've got to say, excuse my ignorance, I'm not quite sure which one this person's referring to.
I think it's probably the Beeman's report.
It's
From
going back a few years. It's the Beeman's then, right? Okay.
Yeah, I mean that is under active consideration at the moment. In terms of, I don't think there's any secret about the fact that the DOI is immense. The span of what falls into that department is huge for anybody to sort of have full oversight of. So that is currently under active consideration. Part of what we talked about today about the housing association. And the conversations around that, around the fact that having somebody focused, looking just on housing, means that you've got a much better chance of delivering the outcomes that the island requires. So taking that forward into different areas. We've already made moves to look at a different operating model around the airport and where that might go. So there are a lot of things happening and more to come on that.
Well, if it is the Beeman's report this person's referring to, then as it appears to be, that's been lie dormant for a few years now then. So where are we up to?
I
appreciate it predates you.
Yes, it does. Well, it doesn't predate me. I was in the department at the time.
In this role,
yeah. But in this role, yes. It is under active consideration and things will be happening soon.
Minister?
I think it's just to sort of your assist is probably easier for me to answer it, I think, rather than Emily. Yeah, I think it probably is the Beeman's review that's probably being referred to, and I think that came out probably from memory, I would say, in maybe 2020, 2021. Yeah. And it is the case now that the future structure and function of the Department of Infrastructure is receiving central attention in order to make sure that the functions are in the right place, probably smaller, and making sure that actually some of the other we know, let's just be completely honest, we know that the big, we've got an issue, we've had an issue with how big strategic things are handled. Now, I definitely think that there is a recognition politically that there needs to be a way to do things differently. So there is work going on at the moment, has been going on work, the Chief Minister would have announced probably prior to the summer about how the DOI is functioning. I think in Council of Ministers, we will be expecting something back quite soon. There had been an initial engagement with Tynwald members as to what the future form and function of the DOI should look like. Clearly, we need really good, strong, quality operational delivery, but the DOI has many, many functions that fall, sort of beyond the classics of kind of doing the maintenance and doing the basics of infrastructure. So it's getting central attention, and I think that there will be some changes and announcements on that soon. So the ethos has not been lost; it's being picked up again.
Thank you very much indeed. Do you know what? I think we're going to open. We've got a few more here, but let's open it to the floor now, because I would imagine I can hear one person already thinking, I think we've got our roving mics. Can we start with that lady at the back there? Thank you, madam. Yes.
I expected us to only a few of the brownfield sites, but it's one of your essential criteria not to endanger any of our dark skies designated areas.
It's obviously...
It's not quite related, but Dane...
Well, in terms of the sites that we're looking at, they're all in kind of urban areas that currently have streetlights and the like. And as part of the scheme, particularly at Westmoreland Village, there's been a street lighting strategy put forward. We've worked that up with the with the city council. I was going to say borough council, but it's city council. So yeah, we engage with them on all the schemes, particularly around any public lighting that arguably would become adopted under the proposals. But again, we are working within an urban area that does have streetlights. So I'll be honest, it's not something specifically that we've considered further, other than what you would normally do in terms of lighting in and around an urban area.
But would it be something going forward on another site that would be on the radar?
Yeah, I think, again, it depends on in terms of where they are and would be a consideration. We'll any projects I've done in the past where we may have I've done schemes where we've got large floodlit football pitches, and we have to do a light spill analysis around that and visual impact assessment. So where appropriate, we would undertake those kinds of assessments and provide the relevant information for approval.
How much does government value those sites, Mott, Lewin?
Hugely. Just to add, so I think we have 26 dark sites. So the largest concentration across the British Isles in one place. So, but they tend to be in areas of natural beauty, tend to be in areas that aren't currently developed for obvious reasons. So, we're talking to a large extent about redeveloping brownfield. We're talking about protecting areas of our greenfield. So, but certainly from again, a Department for Enterprise perspective, we really recognise the value of those, the importance, and I think there's more we can do in terms of promoting those.
Thank you for your question, Madam, as well. Next questioner, David. Oh, no, not David. David will be next. Yes, sir.
Mark talked about saving our heritage and such like. Well, that's quite correct, but these big businessmen come over and buy various properties, leave them derelict, knock them down. As far as I know, the last man has been knocked down. That was part of our heritage. There's Africa House, there's a Castletown golf thing. And the other question is, a lot of the redevelopment that they want to do, they often mention shops going into them. Well, shops are on the decline, so I think that may be a good idea to stop that idea. And what is the position with regards to shops and the likes of transfer with property above that could be used for housing? Thank you very much.
Mark, to begin with.
All good questions. Thank you very much. If I kind of in reverse, there's definitely more work we can do. It's within the built environment reform, and one of the concepts of looking at how we incentivise or encourage the repurposing. So where there could be living accommodation above shops. It's part of the work the business agency are doing at the moment around the town centre orders to just understand what we have in our city, in our towns. Second point about so the proposals this morning that's been unveiled, actually Douglas as a city and as a heart of the community and the amount of people, there is a view that we need some additional focus, and particularly around a revitalised civic square. Still more work to do, still planning application to progress, but I think that'll be really positively received. In terms of the first part, yes, there are other sites, and I think it was mentioned before, but that they're often in private ownership, and that's a difficult place for government to be in. The Island Infrastructure Scheme is part of that. So is there an incentive that we can put on the table that makes economic sense, stimulate enough where it is viable, but from a taxpayer perspective, actually it's a real net gain over the long term? That's part of it. And things like compulsory purchase are part of it. And again, it's referenced in the Built Environment Reform Programme. It's almost a last resort. It's difficult. It's controversial. Powers are there. But I know it's one of the things that, again, there'll be work looked at to see if we have a site that's laid there that isn't being progressed, that clearly becomes an eyesore, then there are powers and there are processes to take that forward.
Okay, thank you. Thoughts on that, Andrew Bentley?
Well, I can talk about this both as my experience in local authorities and as being an architect. From the local authority perspective, there's absolutely no barriers at all to making any of the buildings, any of the upstairs above shops or redundant office buildings being used for accommodation. And I think planning is generally in favour of it. And the barrier from the planning perspective in the past has always been about parking provision. The current planning regime is less precious about that, and that has opened the doors. and my experience of sitting on the Environment and Services Committee at Douglas Council was that pretty much every month, or maybe every other month, there was always a scheme for the conversion of upstairs or a change of use of a former office into a house. But that is the first barrier. The real barrier after that is building control. If you start turning the upstairs of a building into accommodation, next thing is the 1 hour fire protection. Then you've got to have the acoustic separation. You've got to bring the thermal insulation up to modern standards. Then you've got to bring all the new services in. You've then got the technicalities required of the housing standards regulations, that you need to have access to bins. You need to have access to bins at the rear of the property, but you need to access the building from the front of the property. You're expected to have bicycle provision if possible. And the technical demands on buildings that I've found along the way, that you can often be dealing with 5, 6, 7 stages of construction. You're not dealing with one building, you're dealing with a building that's been extended and knocked into the next one and had a couple of refurbishments along the way. So it's far from an easy, and in many cases far from being economic as a possibility.
Thank you. Okay, let us move on. You're going to get your wish now, David. Third time lucky.
Thank you, James. It's probably a political question anyway. Some time ago, it's not that very long, in this very building, we had our plan. We had 2 weeks of consultation with the whole of the community. It's a political question, so the political minister should answer, but I'm giving some students on it. Those decisions that were made in discussion and endorsed by the planning inspector, an independent inspector from the UK, then subsequently endorsed by Tim and voted on. Can you give me the assurance that the green spaces and the sports and recreation side of those elements will be satisfied? And the final thing, just to round up, is why do we use all these things that are coming out? It's going to get the heat anyway. Why don't we call, because there is a conflict of interest when it's government land, it's our land. Why do we get, and I'm going to say this, why do we get the inspector to come over, call the application, and then you get all the views? Votes and all.
Let's take the first one first. Thanks, David. Can you specify on the green site? I was going to ask. Actually, get a guarantee.
I'm going to have to. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to ask for just a little point of clarification, David. Are you talking about when you were talking about the event held in the villa, and you referred to our island plan? Were you actually talking about the inquiry for the? Right, so you're just for clarification, you're talking about a few years ago there was the public inquiry for the area plan for the east. Okay, so the all island area plan. When was it?
Are we at cross purposes here?
I think we might. I think we might be at cross purposes. So I certainly remember I was aware of the area plan for the east, and there was the public inquiry. The planning inspector's inquiry, which is a public occasion, and that is actually the most recent area plan that's been brought to Tynwald. Is that the one? Okay. So, I think that demonstrates part of the process that's outlined in the Town and Country Planning Act, which was that there had to be in effect, and I wasn't, forgive me, I wasn't an MHK then, but I was in Tynwald, so I'm informed, but not as informed as a minister or an MHK would have been at the time. But that process had to go, rightly by law, had to go to a planning inspector. And I think that there were some changes made to the Eastern Area Plan as a result of that. There were also some challenges. So yes, an updated Eastern Area Plan did go to Tynwald and was also approved. But I think that there was learnings from that, some things, that we've reflected on and picked up in terms of timescales and maps and things like that. So now I can turn my attention to that in Cabinet Office. But from my understanding, the reason why that you have a planning inspector involved in this who comes from off island is to try and get over some of the many kind of voices, interests, potential conflicts, to give that independent view, and then ultimately the decision to approve that it does, rightly sit with Tynwald. So I guess that as this process is laid out in a statutory basis with multiple stages, it's done with the intent to afford it that slightly step back approach. So, you hope that the relevant points that the inspector thinks are critical to warrant any adjustment or comment are taken on board from Onken or from Laxey or from Douglas or elsewhere. On the second point you mentioned about calling in, there's different ways that a planning inspector might end up getting involved, and it is, I'm sorry if it's boring, it's all quite detailed, but it is laid out in the Town and Country Planning Act. If there's an appeal to a planning application, so somebody's not happy with the planning decision that's been made in the Planning and Building Directorate in DEFA, somebody can appeal it, and then it can go to an inspector to have a second look, and then they may be recommending to the minister as to what they do. Why do we do that? I think that in the past there has maybe been different views about whether these things should be politically determined. There is still potentially the mechanism for that, but I think more and more people want to understand the process and the transparency and a bit of impartiality around what can be really, really big decisions. So I hope I've tried to answer that as fully as I can.
Thank you, Minister, for that. Just on the green part here, to be sustainable, sort of green infrastructure has to be a key part of the urban realm. So just a question that's come in, does the panel agree that there's a lack of strategy, planning and funding for green infrastructure? And if so, how do we resolve this?
In terms of how they resolve it, I'm not 100% sure in terms of...
But do you think there is a lack of...
well, I think is it 97% of our energy comes from a gas-fired power station.
Like many places.
Yeah, true. But in terms of like when we've looked at designing buildings to achieve kind of net zero, if you looked in the UK, the carbon factor on the grid in the UK is a lot less than it would be here. So actually, to try and achieve a net zero building here becomes quite difficult because of your incoming cable from the electricity isn't reduced in terms of its carbon output. So, I think we're trying to design with those principles in mind, so no gas, all electric air source heat pumps, PVs, etc. And hopefully, as the infrastructure starts to improve and decarbonise, then some of those buildings will start to actually, from the performance point of view, will improve. So the design principles are right, and the infrastructure, which with some of the presentations that have gone on in terms of wind, etc., is moving forward. In my view, that kind of thing does need to happen.
What's your thoughts, Andrew? Bentley?
I think sometimes we get a little bit focused on whether we have a wind turbine or not, and I think infrastructure is a much wider subject. And when you say green infrastructure, what exactly do you mean? I mean, I've worked on a scheme recently where we had to put gas boilers in. It just wasn't practical to go electric because the grid in that area of Douglas was so antiquated that it was impossible to actually run electric heating in this development. And this will be something along much of the area that I represent and Douglas Central as well, that the infrastructure just isn't there. Again, the whole area is on combined sewers. So as soon as there's an overflow and a storm surge, that's your sewage going straight into the bay. So the green infrastructure challenges are far beyond just what your primary source of energy is.
I think we've got time for two more questions from the floor. There's a lady there and there's a gentleman there. In fact, I do beg your pardon. We'll have to go for three now. Then yes, sorry. Yes, sir.
Thank you. That was actually my question to Tess, but I'm quite concerned that non-planner seems to know what green infrastructure actually is. So I will tell you, and then you can answer the question again. Green infrastructure is a network of vegetation, which includes trees, roadside villages, community areas, parks, that runs through our urban realm. So, with that knowledge, I'm trying to answer the question again. Is there a lack of strategy, plan and funding for green infrastructure?
Thank you, sir. Would you change anything you've just said, Minister?
Thank you for the clarification. I don't know if you had a chance to attend the session that was about the review of the strategic plan, and the strategic plan is essentially the planning policy backbone. It's the frame of reference for when planning decisions get made. And you're absolutely right. In terms of how you've described it there, there is something that needs to improve and change to kind of build in that green infrastructure, as you described, trees, plantation, vegetation into the built environment. And I think we've seen some examples, and certainly some of the images that the MDC have put up. But from a broader way to ensure that at a strategic level, like you said, that sort of thing will need to be taken into account of in the update to the strategic plan. I think that now versus in the early 2000s, we're probably a bit more passionate and caring and want to in terms of what we would want to see in terms of the green space in the built environment. So that, along with the more tricky subject of how you get to things like biodiversity net gain, are all things that will need to be taken account of in the update to planning policy, and part of that is because of the Climate Change Act and the requirements in there.
Further to your earlier answer, Andrew?
Well, I mean, the public open space side of things and its maintenance is very much in the park of the local authorities. In Douglas, we've done much with the Plan B and the pollinator programme. We've got a developing relationship with the Manx Wildlife Trusts, which we're looking to pursue. And we've brought in a new play policy as well, which has been a move away from risk aversion to risk benefit. And I think the main thing I would like to see the council working on, and this is something that does come from the strategic plan, I think it's Recreation Policy 3, which requires a certain amount of open space with new developments. We don't have a lot of space left in Douglas to have a development of 10 or more houses. The Appendix 6, I think it is, of the strategic plan lays down all the rules. And I always feel that for too long, we've looked at this in a purely quantitative approach. We've always looked at it and said, right, we need this many square meters for this many square meters for that. And then any shortfall, we'll just give some money to the local authority. And actually, when you read Appendix 6, it becomes there's a certain amount of qualitative expectation in there as well. I would like to see the council and other local authorities being more vociferous in that. I'm a big fan of the Future Generations Act in Wales, which expects minimum standard of play quality in new developments. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Penultimate question, yes.
Hello. I'd just like to ask the panel, do they think we'll ever see a reduction in the motor car on the Isle of Man? It's just like Westmoreland Village, which I applaud. All the people that won't be allowed to have their cars around there will park them elsewhere. I live in central Douglas, and it's just roads and lanes jammed with cars. Douglas Park has nose to tail twice a day now. And the pollution must be bad. They get blown away. So, do you think they'll ever be able to do something about reducing the cars? I mean, people here today, I'm not attacking anybody, walked or cycled or took a bus. It's just we love our cars here, don't we?
I see you regularly on your bike, Phil. Dane can take that one.
Yeah, I think we've tried to, again, going back to earlier kind of comments in terms of the active travel, I think we can talk about active travel, but it's actually providing the infrastructure to allow that to be a meaningful alternative mode and hopefully try and get people out of their cars. We have taken an approach on Westmoreland Village in terms of trying to reduce that, the carbon benefits associated with that, the balance of providing parking against providing public open space and the green infrastructure that we've just talked about. But it's, I feel as a developer, we need to provide some of those things to make it a viable alternative. Also, cars are becoming, it's an expensive thing to run. I spoke to someone recently who said that when they did the calculations against a new car, the depreciation, the cost for insurance, the cost for parking, the cost for running it, he said, I'd have been cheaper taking a taxi for every journey that I could do instead of having my own car. So they are an expensive, it's an expensive luxury. So I'm hopeful that the car, it does start to reduce, and we've got to start somewhere. And hopefully with our application in terms of the approach that we've taken, hopefully that can be a catalyst to try and help that.
Thank you, Phil. And the very final, the honour of the very final question of the Isle of Man 2023 Government Conference, Madam.
Yes. This just now is planned for tomorrow, and I've not heard any mention of care of the elderly whatsoever just now. There's no nursing homes planned. There doesn't seem to be any other sheltered accommodation. Looking at Peel alone, we had the current home closed, which of course it pertained to. We've had West Side closed. Not that long ago, Glenside was closed. I know they're trying to close Ramsey, and it's been put on hold. But the point is, when the elderly end up moving out of the location, that increases their mental problems. If they've lived in Ramsey all their life, there's no point in them going down to Books and Mary. And I just feel that there doesn't seem to be any mention at the moment of this planning for them. And I really feel it needs to be. Over the years, we've lost beds to the Newlands. Many years ago, there was Brennan and Ballymona, and we are an ageing population. So what plans are there, please, for the future for all of us, really?
And I think that the Minister will take that one, if possible.
Yeah, and thank you so much for raising it. Absolutely, I think there's different provision for sheltered accommodation and residential and nursing care in different forms in different parts of the island. You're absolutely right. In the West, there is a lack. But there's also a lot of people who do want to stay in the community and who need to perhaps move on to next stage housing. Now, I think that if you're looking at the overall need to plan, certainly for the population, then that is an element that needs to be taken into account of. I think that possibly with sheltered accommodation, there is something possibly for a future housing association to play. But my kind of view from about sort of the development of residential care in particular is that I think what you need is to have really good quality residential care. There is, to put it in very basic terms, a market for that. There's a need for quality provision for people to stay in their communities so that they are not isolated and they are not lonely at home and people can visit them. And I think that the role of the state, if you like, is to make sure that you have well-regulated running of that provision. So I think that some of these conversations about what you do with old buildings that are vacant in towns and actually what sort of community you want to create, should help draw out much needed conclusions for the provision of residential nursing care, because we still need it and there is an absolute lack, particularly in some parts of the island. So it's not certainly not off my agenda for that area at all.